How's it going, everyone? Hope everyone is doing well. This is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour, a critical look at Canada's role abroad. I'm Yves coming to you from Jojage. This is about the 140th or something around there um, week of sessions episodes. There's a lot of developments this week, and I would prefer not to go too much above uh, the hour mark. So I'm going to try to get right to it. Um, this There was a story that it's actually from 2 weeks ago. I initially saw from Nikki Ashton, the NDP revenue critic, which is about the UN tax convention. It's a Hill Times story. And basically, the this UN tax convention is an effort to bring in some minimal standards around corporate tax rates and wealth tax stuff, or tax on wealthy, to basically bring some control to lessen the ability of the wealthy and corporations to avoid paying tax. And the the um, the there was a vote. I don't know exactly when the vote was, sometime before the article, which published 2 weeks ago. And it's like, I forget the exact number of countries voted for it, but it's like 120, 140. Canada was one of 8 countries that voted against. And this is a pattern, right? Canada consistently, they'll say they support, the Liberals will say they support, progressive taxation, da 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 da. But when you look at the role Canada's played in setting up tax havens in the Caribbean, in opposing efforts to bring in different standards on minimum standards on corporate tax rates, they have consistently been ambivalent or, in some cases, hostile. And this is just the latest example. And according to the story, the Canadian officials, it's not just the actual voting, it's at the sessions where they're negotiating stuff. And apparently, the Canadian officials are consistently putting up roadblocks to undermine the whole movement forward to bring in global standards on this UN tax convention that basically the global South is pushing. There was a number of stories this week about the climate issue. There was actually a Financial Times piece, the London Financial Times, titled "Canada Under Fire from All Sides Over Policy to Reduce Greenhouse Gas Emissions." And it points out that the Canadian government has done a poor job of fulfilling its already uh, insufficient targets of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And Le Devoir story said that uh, Canadian greenhouse gas emissions are down 7.1% from 2005. Yet the Canadian government is committed to having them down 40 to 45% by 2030. So at this point, it's almost impossible to imagine reaching the 40 to 45% before, in 5 years from now or so. And so the Trudeau government, has just obviously there was actually this week again a story about the pipeline. There's no way they're going to get the money back for the pipeline to the coast. I think $32 billion, the tar sands pipeline that the Liberals purchased. And so this is, again, this is under Stephen Guilbeault, claims to be environmentalist. Also, Le Devoir is reporting that the Liberals' targets around planting trees, they're not even like in the vicinity of reaching I think it was 2 billion. I think it's like 70 million or something like that they're at. And they've been playing all these shenanigans. They released this information about how far off they are. I think like it was, according to Le Devoir, was like just before the U.S. election, right? You tried to bury it in the in the focus on the U.S. election. So this is, and the stories, Canada apparently 5.1 million barrels of oil of exports a day, I think is what they're saying, or is it 5.1 billion of production? I'm not sure what. But it's, this is huge. The story had it, Canada's like the fifth biggest. I think that they said that of extraction. I had to check those numbers. But this is, and if you look at it, the tar sands, right? The tar sands make up just incredible proportion of Canada's overall greenhouse gas emissions. And there's this pushback to, and the liberals have been buckling. The industry is pushing back hard against a cap on emissions. Obviously, we don't just need a cap on emissions. We need to be going drastically in the other direction. There's no reason they should have been even extracted in the first place. The whole process that began 20, 25 years ago should never have begun. We had more than enough knowledge about the dangers of runaway climate disturbances, and we're seeing them all over increasingly, of course. On Africa, Melanie Joly posted a couple things about this Africa policy. They're adding a couple new embassy, upgrading a couple new diplomatic posts to the full status. Benin and Zambia, I believe, are the two countries. And in the post that Melanie Joly puts on Twitter, she describes with 70 plus years of partnership, we're deepening our engagement in Africa. And there's this little video that Joly does where it talks about all the benefits that Canada's got from Africa. Now, about the benefits are the diaspora, of course. So I posted about whether the oil profits or the mining profits are those considered benefits. For some reason, Melanie Joly didn't list the profits Canadian companies are taking out of African resources as one of the benefits Canada's getting from Africa, from the continent. But and so there's obviously that whole question. They deny, and this story in the Hill Times titled "Canada, Africa, and the Imperative of Global Engagement." Now we'll leave aside this kind of Africa industry of we have to engage with the continent and this rhetoric rather than it's the whole aid NGO kind of missionary angle, framing of stuff when it comes to Africa. But in this story, he does point out that Canada is nearly 40 billion in listed mining and energy assets on the continent. Most of that would be mining. So that's a very sizable amount. My understanding is it's after the Americas, it's the biggest in mining, right? There's greater Canadian mining assets on the African continent than there is in Asia. Um, uh, so that question about the mining question, of course, is central to Canadian foreign policy across the continent in dozens of places. That is the main thing Canadian diplomacy does, is advance the interests of Canadian mining companies, and that's kind of left out. But the other part I just thought interesting, why they chose the 70 plus years, because Canadian troops were dispatched, 400 of them were dispatched to Sudan in 1884, right? So that's 140 years ago, right? There was Canadian, obviously the Boer War, I think 7,000 Canadians in 1899, early 1900s. There's Canadian trade commissioners that are there from I don't remember, I think it's either late 1800s, early 1900s, right? And then there's actually Canadian trade commissioners in many parts of the continent in during the colonial period. And then there's of course Canadian colonial governors, right? There's Canadian Percy Girard, who's the governor of northern Nigeria, and he's governor of Kenya. And there's another Canadian who's governor of Ghana during British colonial governor, obviously working for the British, but they're Canadians. Um, and so that's all kind of left out. But from what I basically take is the 70 years is designed to imply that Canadian relations to the continent. There's the whole missionary thing, right? My book, Canada and Africa, the first about half of the book. It's about 100, 120,000 word book. I think the first at least 40% is all pre-colonial period. Probably half, I think it's half the book. So, there's 70 more years minimum of leaving aside the Canada's ties to the transatlantic slave trade and that. But there's 70 years of Canadian soldiers, Canadian diplomats, Canadian officials, trade commissioners, and the like on the continent. And so why do you choose 70 years? Now, I think you choose 70 years because you imply that Canada's relationship begins to the continent uh, with the independence, because of course, it's just understood that Canada opposed European colonialism in Africa. There's no way Canada would have any connection to European colonialism in Africa. That's Canada was leading the charge. You had Lester Pearson sending guns to the Mau Mau, and you had all kinds of Canadian resistance, of course. Now, so I thought that was interesting, and again, it's all part of the whole. You can't make any sense of Canada's relationship to the continent if you don't look at the historical trajectory, and you certainly can't make any sense of Canada's relationship to the continent if you don't look at the mining industry, and those are things that Melanie Joly doesn't want us to doesn't highlight and doesn't want us to look at. On the China file, was announced this week that Canada's shutting down TikTok's Canadian arm. That's of course all tied to the big American push against TikTok, and but they're not banning the app, which would have been, it's kind of that's obviously a much bigger play to ban the app than the Canadian arm. I'm not sure how substantive TikTok's Canadian arm is. There are a bunch of Canadian kind of like TikTok influencers that are complaining this is going to undermine them and stuff like that. I don't know how real it's all, how big impact it's actually going to have. Um, but it's all, it's feeding this everything to do with China is dangerous, etc. angle. Today's Globe and Mail, the report on business had a front page piece about this mining deal between Paladin and the title is Paladin Fission Deal in Limbo Amid Concerns of Chinese Influence. And it's a Canadian company and a Australian company. An Australian company is trying to buy the Canadian company. And I guess on both sides, both of the companies have some connections to some Chinese companies. And apparently the merger world, the business world, is quite troubled by this because the company looked like the deal was through, and then now it looks like the Canadian government has really taken their time in terms of okaying this purchase. And so they talk about, there's in the article, there's a person saying about what's another Five Eyes country, the anti-China Five Eyes. So why can't another Five Eyes country's company buy up a Canadian company? Because it apparently has, Paladin has what do they say? It's a mine of some mineral that I guess is considered somewhat, not rare earth, but of some strategic value, and they also have some operations internationally. And this is all part of this the business. I've said this many times, but I think it's actually quite an important story in terms of Canada-China relations. And the business community is very divided, particularly in the mining sector. They clearly have tons of relationships to China, to Chinese firms. They want to have the free hand to either buy up, sell out with Chinese companies, and of course they're this global powerhouse. So many of the resources that we're talking about aren't actually even in Canada, though in this case the one of the issues is actually a mine within Canada. But it's clearly a big issue within the corporate world, and they have tons of stories in the report on business about this issue. Um, the Globe also had a piece titled "Canada Posts Cyber Attaché in Taiwan as Ties Deepen," and so this is just further example of the sort of softening the one China kind of policy of the Canadian government, deepening ties with Taiwan. The Chinese government, of course, doesn't appreciate this. The whole Taiwan question is a complicated one, but it's Canada, how Canada positions itself on that issue is it's also of course has to be seen in the big context of the U.S. pushing conflictual relations all across the board, and Canada going along with this, in by these sort of small steps, like having a cyber attaché posted to Taiwan. Now, of course, Donald Trump won. I want to probably talk about the U.S. elections as little as possible, but Donald Trump did win, and this is going to mean something for Canadian foreign policy. Um, it's unclear what Trump's going to do on a lot of things. I think that likely he's going to continue with the pro-Israel policy. He was, of course, very pro-Israel. Lots of very pro-Israel people. The person he appointed to looks like can be the UN ambassador, has this, crazy track record of attacking Palestine solidarity. And you look at his major donor, Miriam Adelson. That's Israel's central issue to her. I think she gave him $100 million for the election. And Iran, of course, he's been a very hard on Iran. So the possibility of going to war with Iran, I think, is there. Now, Trump has also been, I think, more, his sort of "we don't want to pay for everything" kind of rhetoric, the sort of nationalist rhetoric. If he was to come even close to applying some of this, it would be a huge blow to Israel because they've apparently it's 27 billion since October 7th in weaponry that the US has sent. Some of that is sold, but I think the vast majority of that is donated. And that's a huge amount. That's a huge amount of weaponry. Probably, Hamas's military budget is probably like I don't know, $100 million, $50 million, $200 million. So it's maybe half a billion. It would be what would that 40, 50 times more than what Hamas spends on arms or weaponry. But so if Trump was to fulfill any of that kind of rhetoric, he would that would be a big blow to Israel. And it would basically mean Israel wouldn't be able to do what it's been doing. Now, on Ukraine, I think that there is going to be, it's going to probably turn out for the better. It's going to probably speed up the process of some sort of negotiated solution to this war that's just looks like it's getting worse and worse for Ukraine. Um, on China, I think Trump's going to be, he's obviously going to be, he was hard with tariffs and that type of stuff, and delinking economically from China, and so he will, there's a whole business about he's doesn't he's not as into the alliances that the U.S. has been setting up to counter China, and that's really the only chance of the U.S. being able to really counter China is with rigorous alliances. So if that's not, they definitely need to stimulate Japan to take, aggressive position. They obviously need Taiwan as an anchor in there, Philippines, so Australia. So if Trump's less on board for that, that's going to affect the sort of possibility of a war with China. Nonetheless, the Canadian government has already shown that it's going to be very deferential. That's what it showed in that's that infamous communique that got almost no attention, where when Christian Freeland, after Trump's first election, Christian Freeland was appointed foreign minister, and the U.S. Embassy cabled the State Department saying that Canada adopts an America First foreign policy. And so Trudeau again has tapped Freeland to lead the this revived U.S. Relations Cabinet Committee, um, which is going to become much more important. Uh, so we'll see what happens in terms of Canadian foreign policy with regards to the U.S. I mean, it's obviously so hyper pro-U.S. already that how can it get more pro-U.S.? I'm on the NATO, the military spending question is going to gives all the militarists further justification for ramping up their push for more military spending, but they were doing that anyways. Um, I kind of am the opinion that the Biden administration pushing this conflict with Russia, that ratcheting up tensions, that actually is a more substantive impact on the push towards increasing military spending than Trump's kind of like, scary rhetoric of I'm going to abolish NATO and I'm not going to defend countries don't pay their way and this kind of stuff like that. Um, so even though there's a sort of liberal kind of world that's framing this Trump, that Trump's the real pusher on that, but um, yeah, on US stuff, there was a good piece, an interesting piece in the Globe on Saturday by the former monk school, Stein. Uh, Anyways, it's through two other people, former anyway top official at Global Affairs, I believe, and a bureaucrat in the bureaucratic side, and a third person. But there's a whole bunch of things in this column. I don't agree with obviously the broad. One of the points that they make in this thing is that Canada basically has to deepen relations with the U.S. because we can't. The only other option would be to turn towards China or India or significantly increase our population. So for economic reasons, we just have to be so concerned with the U.S. because they don't get into it in detail, but I think they're suggesting that India's too small of a market, too far away, too small of a market. China, of course, it does have a potential as being a alternative market, but we've gone so far down the path of tension and conflict with China, and the establishment is so hostile towards China that that's not an option. And we've even, in the previous trade agreement, the updated NAFTA, the Americans got Canada to basically agree to not signing a trade agreement with China, which was actually on the table back then. But so boxed in on that front, which of course the U.S. has played a role in boxing in, and so our only option is the U.S. They talk about that, and but there's a whole series of things about why the U.S. Kind of cares about Canada or Canada's power within the U.S. and stuff like that. And I agree with a bunch of these points. I guess Canada's leverage with the U.S. would be one way to frame it. And they point out that CAE trains, that's a Montreal-based flight simulator company. CAE trains every U.S. Air Force aviation candidate on its flight simulators. MDA Space is the only non-American company allowed to operate a satellite tracking system with United States Command. And it goes into it talks about how the American Enterprise Institute, this right-wing US think tank, is promoting Canadian membership. Why? Because of Canada's world-leading expertise in AI. So I didn't realize Canada's apparently second biggest AI kind of hub in the world. This is what this mentions. Um, with counter hypersonic missiles and cyber, I guess this AI helps in that. Our vast deposits of such defense-related different minerals, uh, and knowledge of the Arctic, and so the role in Arctic. So basically, there's the hard, geostrategists in the U.S. care about Canada for a whole series of different reasons, and so we have leverage on those fronts. Which you can get into some of these things. I think there's truths in that, and um, there's different kind of points there that are, in my opinion, not kind of irrelevant, but also true. Another thing on the U.S., just I mentioned this previously, but I think it's stunning the statistics. You see it in a different article says so. Toronto Dominion, I've mentioned this about Toronto Dominion being the 10th largest retail bank in the U.S., but apparently the Bank of Montreal is also top 15. Canadian Imperial Bank has been buying up lots, and Scotiabank is in the top 30. And so four Canadian banks are apparently like I think they're all in the top 30 in the U.S. in in terms of banking, which is pretty remarkable. Um, on the subject of Remembrance Day and militarism, yesterday in the afternoon, there was the CF-18s flew over the Alouettes game, the Canadian Football League game here. So I was here with Joshua and his friend, and we could hear these the fighter jets flying above, um, and they did two different, I guess, fly pasts or whatever the game. When I'm not that close, I'd probably be like two 2 or 3 kilometers from where the stadium is. But you can hear it very clearly here. They went outside. I think they saw the planes. I tried to explain that these were the type of fighter jets that were dropping bombs on Gaza. Um, but uh, today I went to the Remembrance Day ceremony here in Montreal, and it's not an official holiday here, unlike I think everywhere else in the country maybe. Um, but the downtown, like on Beck Street, they I got actually quite scared. I went down to like try to find politicians, and I talked to one city councilor, but the police were kind of all over me, and it was a very big police operation, and I didn't bother sticking around for very long. But they fired off these rockets. They fire off these not rock. I don't know what this is. It's anyways, some sort of missile. It was unbelievable. Multiple cars. I ended up being walking kind of by right. I thought I was getting out of there before they did it, but they did it 10 minutes before than I thought in the 11th minute. And it's just incredible. The car alarms going off all over scared me seriously. And the whole Remembrance Day thing at a bigger political issue, a political level, it's if there was any seriousness about remembrance, people who are the promoting Remembrance Day and the horrors of war, they should be the people pushing for ending the slaughter in Gaza, right? But it's diametrically opposed to that. The people who are pushing Remembrance Day tend to be the ones who are supportive of these kind of horrors, and it's really is just a celebration of martial patriotism. It's all about our side, right? Remembering our side. We don't remember ever the Afghans, the Libyans, the Iraqis killed in recent Canadian wars, last 3 decades plus. Um, we don't remember, go back historically. We don't remember the horrors of, it's World War One, right? We don't remember what we did, Canadian troops did in terms of World War One in this different slaughter. And so um, and so the it really is just this sort of one-sided. And then when you delve into different elements of like the poppy, right? The poppy raises it's a copyright of the Royal Canadian Legion and raises funds for the Royal Canadian Legion. And the Royal Canadian Legion has been a very militaristic right-wing force. It was set up in part, it was supported in part by the government in the 1920s to undermine the veterans organizations that were very angry about what they um, were brought into during World War, how horrible it was, and what they got basically bamboozled into fighting. And it's continued to be a seriously militaristic, very racist, Cold War kind of whatever. You still have to sign these pledges of what you commit. Sort of like I commit not to overthrowing the government. These very like kind of anti-communist type pledges to be a member of the Legion. And and so yeah, this is what Remembrance Day is. It shouldn't be. It should be, if it's about remembering the horrors of war or the victims of war, that should be something very powerful. But this comes out of World War One. The poppy comes out of it's a poem of raw poem for the horrors of World War One, which no one can possibly argue is anything but a insane inter-imperialist conflict. It was nothing about defending democracy. It was Canadian officials were open. This is about supporting the British Empire. Canadians fought in Africa. Canadians fought in the Middle East. Canadians garrisoned British colonies in the Caribbean. So that's all part of the history of Remembrance Day that's kind of all just sort of ignored. Today's Globe, front page of the Globe was about they had an announcement of a story about the Canadian woman fighting in on the front line in Ukraine. And this Canadian 31-year-old, I'm forgetting her name, she's fighting. So her trajectory of going to fight in the Ukrainian military, she's in the Canadian military. She trains in Poland, trains Ukrainians in Poland 2023 on the Leopard tanks. And then she gets a discharge from the Canadian military and then heads off to fight in the Ukrainian military. And then the Canadian media provides this kind of like uh, glorious story of her on Remembrance Day. So from a Russian perspective, this is just a Canadian fighting, of course, right, against them. Um, that was kind of interesting. And we've known that there's many Canadians fighting against. I mentioned last week, Canadian killed in Russia recently. There's a story about it is urgent. Alberta military reservists eager to join Canadian forces in Latvia. Military reserves hope for the Latvia deployment. Just about all these Canadian troops who want to put their training to use and um, go and station Latvia. I haven't heard much about Latvia recently, but we're up to like 800, maybe even 1,000 now Canadian troops stationed in Latvia on Russia's border. Um, there's a couple of other interesting ones on developments. Clearly, Russia's gaining quite significantly, uh, um, and the Ukrainian military is, if not collapsing, is suffering serious blows. And of course, Trump's victory is going to make their position harder and harder. Um, the National Post published a piece on the front page on Thursday or Friday, which I thought was interesting for what I think is setting up. The headline was, "If Ukraine does fall to Russia, the blame lies with Biden." Okay, so the National Post has been very hawkish on NATO proxy war. But to me, they're setting up for the fact they know that this is Ukraine's losing. and they know that Trump doesn't want to continue. And the National Post, if not outright pro-Trump, is sort of pro-Trump. And so a lot of these people who are pro, sort of basically supportive of Trump, but are serious NATO types, and there's a whole slew of them in the intelligentsia or in the media world. This story to me is setting up to try to sort of say, well, Trump's going to end this war. We don't really want to blame Trump. So we know we know this is going to end poorly for Ukraine. And so let's try to put the blame on Biden. And so that tension among a bunch of pro-Trump people who are also big NATO people, they're trying to figure that out in advance. That to me what this National Post story was basically doing. Le Devoir had a piece total opposite direction. It was titled "Trump lâchera-t-il l'Europe?" So will he abandon Europe? And there was a story about the way sort of indirectly kind of highlights the absurdity of this. Now, of course, a big part of this from the US perspective was prodding division between Russia and Germany as a way to make Western Europe, Central Europe, further subordinate to Washington's dictates. So, for instance, of course, most obviously, Germany cutting off energy purchases from Russia, and then turning to the U.S. Fracking or natural gas or whatever, and so the idea that it's about abandoning, that this is all about, it's like, well, to a large extent, the aim from the U.S. perspective with Ukraine was to weaken Russia, but was also to strengthen U.S. power, strengthen NATO power in Europe, and so yeah, that's not really the abandoning. It's but of course, Germany and France are now increasingly in a bind because they have hurt themselves, particularly Germany, vis-a-vis Russia. And but then the U.S. shifts gears. So we'll see where this all plays out. But I think it's a ridiculous headline about abandoning Europe, when in fact a large part of what this was all about was about, from the U.S. perspective, was subordinating Europe. And so on that kind of dynamic, there was a story. I'm not sure if it was the Globe piece. I think with Janice Stein as one of the co-authors. I think it was in that piece. Someone points out that Japan plans to use Canadian liquefied natural gas to replace 9% of its gas coming from Russia next year. And so this is just it's a bit piece in how Canada has been done well by the NATO proxy war, right? And I've stated that Canada has very little, unlike lots of countries that have lots of economic ties, very limited negative impacts for Canada to push the NATO proxy war. And on that, like Chrystia Freeland told the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, reportedly told the Ukrainian Canadian Congress 50th anniversary celebration in Edmonton, that Canada's leading efforts to push Russian oil out of the world market. She said Alberta can play a role in replacing Russian oil in the global economy. So whether this is actually true, it's part of going to an Alberta audience and making the case for further tar sands extraction through the lens of undermining that big bad Russia and helping the Ukrainian people versus through the lens of more profits for oil companies and more climate disturbances for the world. And then one other final thing on this issue, that the National Security Committee, including the Conservatives, basically repudiated Chris Alexander's claim of David Buglesi being a KGB agent. They kind of like apologized to him at the meeting 2 or 3 days ago. So that's kind of an interesting positive development. Another positive development on this before moving to Palestine is that there is a mobilization. This NATO Parliamentary Assembly is taking place here in Montreal in 2 weeks, the 22nd, 25th. And just yesterday, I saw, so my neighborhood, there's been posters going up all over, block NATO, block on l'OTAN. There must be hundreds. I've seen 15, 20. So that the mobilization is going on. That there's a Friday evening demo, a Saturday afternoon demo, and then a counter summit on a Sunday. And then yesterday there's a different poster for a on the Friday some educational. It's a student framed um, uh, criticism of the NATO summit. See if I have I took a photo of it. And it says Manifestation étudiante contre l'OTAN pour une éducation décoloniale. So against NATO for a decolonial education. And it begins just before the other Friday demo. So I don't know if it's supposed to feed into it. And they say they have activities from 10 to 4 teach-ins, banner making shows, and then there's more information with the QR code that I haven't checked out. So there are posters now for 3 different demos going up around the city. I don't think any of this is going to be huge, but it's clearly this summit is not going to go without a response, and I think that's a lot better than in many other occasions recently. Now, on Palestine, Smoldrich today said that they're going to annex the West Bank next year. We'll see what that means, see how Trump responds. There was the Canadian one, a CBC article, Canadian government's speaking with allies about Palestinian statehood recognition. So the Foreign Affairs Committee had a whole discussion on Palestine, recognizing Palestine. And so there, that question's going. I'm very ambivalent on that issue. I mean, I think it's obviously better to do than not, but I'm more focused on the removing the ways in which we support the apartheid state committing the genocide than the sort of quote unquote, for the Palestinian stuff, be that the different aid and the recognition of Palestine. I think we have to focus more on the ending of Canada's support. The recognition gets into some tricky territory with the PA and stuff like that. But obviously it's better, preferable to do than not do. But yeah, but so that's a question out there. There's been a lot of campaigning on that. Clearly the committee is supportive of it. On a more negative note, the Nova Scotia NDP dropped a candidate for saying that genocide is a bad thing. Totally embarrassing. I guess there's an election in Nova Scotia in about 3 weeks, and 2, 3 weeks, and they're conceding unbelievably. Jagmeet didn't meet with the UN Special Rapporteur for the Palestinian territories. Francesco Albanese, but he did a few days before Albanese was here. He met with Iris Weinstein Haggai, who's this daughter of sort of Israeli Canadian, and she's basically running around being, how do I justify more killing of Palestinians, and but framing it through her mother is or father body in is thought to maybe be in Gaza. I forget the details. So that's pretty remarkable that Singh would do that, despite and not meet with the rapporteur. But that's not, these aren't by, I mean, it's possible there was some scheduling issues, but this is probably not by, this is probably political. The on this Amsterdam thing, I wanted to talk a bit about this because I think this Amsterdam issue is it speaks to both the power, the remarkable power, and the weakening of these anti-Semitism frenzies that they've pop up every. I mean, it's been going. I've been watching this for 20 plus years, but uh, the now the Jagmeet's, I should say, Jagmeet's statement is a sign of the weakening. So Jagmeet does do a two sides. So he's out there. All the other major political leaders, they all just echoed the official Israeli line on this issue. The leader of the BC NDP, David Eby, this is BC, what, 10,000 kilometers away from Holland, from Amsterdam. He tweets at a time when communities in BC and around the world are experiencing hate, it's disgusting to see violent anti-Semitism on the streets of Amsterdam. Israeli soccer fans chased and beaten after attending a match. Kristallnacht was 86 years ago. We cannot forget. Um, uh, so EB is going full on this. Now, of course, I assume most people have seen that these football hooligans from this racist Tel Aviv club, Maccabi, um, they they instigated all kinds of attacks, taxis, and looking for fights, whipped down Palestinian flags, chanted all kinds of "fuck the Arabs." Oh, there's no schools in Gaza. All the kids are killed. All these racist slogans. Did things at the match. The moment of silence for the Spanish. So they did a whole bunch of provocative things, including multiple violent things, and then including on the night where they started getting they got a response. There's image of them with poles and running around attacking. They're one of the main images has been used to show apparently the Israeli football hooligans being attacked is actually them attacking, and the person who actually Al Jazeera interviewed the woman. I saw it online, but then Al Jazeera actually interviewed her. It's just they flip it upside down. And this was reported in the New York Times, a whole bunch, Sky. I don't remember all the publications that used this footage. So they just literally inverted things. Now, there were clearly some of these Israeli football fans that were beat, that were attacked, and that were uh, profiled, if you want to call it that, right? Where they were basically like, are you an Israeli football fan? And then they'd say to these people like, if you want to, like, we'll let you go if you say free Palestine and stuff like that. Uh, so this is obviously an issue. It's kind of caught in a whole bunch of dynamics. It's caught in the dynamic of it's just literally a response to these football hooligans. Obviously, then there's the Gaza and the horrors of what Israel is doing context. And then and it's a you can debate whether I'm sure there were incidents, there were individuals that were unfairly targeted. There's no evidence there was any Amsterdam Jewish organization. Apparently, no Amsterdam Jewish organization asked for police the night of. There's no evidence that any Amsterdam Jewish organization was in any way like targeted whatsoever. So it's entirely Israeli and Israeli football. And you can debate whether like some random fan of this is racist Israeli football club, whether they like should be, beat up because they want, if they won't say free Palestine. You can debate that if that's, right, like that's but there's a whole kind of dynamic and context that this is flowing out of. Um, I obviously don't believe that is it's this is mostly on UEFA. They don't let Russian teams play, right? Imagine if Russian football hooligans accompanied, went to Holland and did, I mean, it's just so beyond imaginable. And there was Mossad agents help that were there with the Israeli football hooligans and all this kind of stuff. So almost for sure, there's a whole element of this that was all basically kind of like staged in a sense. that they knew this was variations of this going to happen, and the Israeli government was going to do everything they could to spin it in the way they wanted to spin it. So you see the premier of BC going along with it. That's insane. Football hooligan debate. Premier of BC getting involved in the football hooligan issue taking place 10,000 kilometers away seems pretty crazy. Elizabeth May's intervention is remarkable. On behalf of Canadian Greens, I am horrified by anti-Semitic attack on Israeli soccer fans in Amsterdam. We condemn such hate. Ironically, I learned of it while attending event commemorating Kristallnacht horror of 86 years ago. Never again. So she's just going full on here, right? And I'm doing this piece on Elizabeth May. I'm going back over some of the stuff. She did that thing a month ago where she just stated really clearly that Israeli lives are more important than Palestinian lives. I mean, there wasn't, as she put it, who the bell tolls loudest for were the victims of October 7th. And um, so, and I was going back over, she said in 2015, she made this like really clearly philo-Semitic comment to the Canadian Jewish News and about how wonderful the Canadian Jewish community is, how important it's been, and not just sort of like the standard kind of wording, but really getting into like basically Jews are special. And so I went back and I read her October 7th statement. And what I'd missed in this, so Dimitri and I did an interview with Alex Terrell about this, but what I'd missed in it is that it ends off with this, what I think is a psalm. It's just like, like sort of I don't know, whatever, as a religious poem or whatever. And this is, I grew up atheistic. I don't, that doesn't connect with me at all at a personal level, have like getting into God, this or anything like that. It just doesn't connect with me at all. And it surprises me that it does. And I knew that Elizabeth May, is a practicing Anglican and wanted to be a minister, went to school, I think, even for that. So she's a religious person. But in it ends with it's clearly Christian Zionist. There's three mentions of Israel in this. I think it's a psalm. I don't know if that's proper pronunciation, and and so she's clearly a Christian Zionist, and I knew that, and I've written a little bit about that, and it's from Anglicans have a whole long history of anti-Palestinian Christian Zionism, and I find it so fascinating that something I knew, but it's surprising from somebody who's a bit more at the progressive end of this basically this Jewish supremacism coming from Elizabeth May that's actually rooted in part in Christian in her Christian Christianity. I think her reaction to this is, there's other factors, of course, in it, but that's one of the factors in this in her statement, which is odious beyond belief. And then our good prime minister also tweeted out, "The news out of Amsterdam last night is horrifying. This is a dark moment for our world, and one we have seen before. My heart goes out to the victims and the entire Jewish community today. Canada condemns this disgusting anti-Semitism." So I responded on Twitter because he uses the word horrifying. So I responded, "Have you ever used the word horrifying for the Holocaust in Gaza?" And almost certainly Trudeau has never used the word horrifying for the absolute slaughter in Gaza. And this is where I think that you see the power of these anti-Semitism buhas, these frenzies, but then you also see the weakness. So for instance, my tweet had 38,000 likes versus Trudeau's 16,000. The same thing I was tweeted in response to David Eby and Elizabeth May, and in all the cases they were ratioed. So I had way more likes for the statements I made than the Premier and Elizabeth May. So there people are posting this, and I think there is a truth, and I think they may have overplayed their hand on this Amsterdam issue, right? The Israeli government, the Israeli lobby, and the different forces. hyped this up so much, and the pushback was quite significant. The media, the corporate media, dominant media's coverage of it's bad, but the pushback in social media is pretty. I mean, this is I've been seeing these frenzies going back more than 20 years, right? So I've seen this whole process of how, like, let's be clear here. Like, when Dmitry Laskaris got done up in one of these in 2018, when he tweeted about Housefather and Michael Levitt, and they claimed he was anti-Semitic because he said he I forget the wording, but they prioritized Israel. He got done up, and all the politicians came down. The whole, it was the whole boo-ha. This is a Canadian-based one. This is an international one, but similar kind of dynamics. CJPME threw Dmitry under the bus, and he was on the board at that time, right? So this is not very long ago. That's 6 years ago, where groups like CJPME, IJV, varying degrees and different dynamics, have they cower to these frenzies. That's not happening anymore, right? Now we actually have, and this panicked the pro-Israel people in Canada. You actually have Jagmeet Singh not going, like, two-siding it, saying yes, there was two things going. There was, we condemned the anti-Semitism, but there was also anti-Arab racism, and I forget the exact wording he uses, but he two sides it, and that freaks out the pro-Israel people. That's a big victory. I mean, it's so he should be actually saying that why was a Israeli football club allowed to be playing in this tournament? It's a European tournament. Why, I don't even know why Israel's part of it. I assume it's out part of it because the Arab world doesn't want to engage with Israel. Why should UEFA open their door to Israel? And anyway, that's what he should be saying. But even the two siding speaks to how diminishing on all of this. I've gone on way too long here. I actually have a decent amount of stuff left, but I don't really think I should keep going. I'll just skip a few of these things. And the Albanese stuff is pretty. There's a good piece on Canadian Dimension by Larry Haven about the attempts to censor Albanese, the Israel lobby's attempts to censor her. That I think I was mentioning a little bit of this media, a couple of media things that are, I think. So Peter MacKay has a piece in the Globe Mail, op-ed in the Globe Mail. And this is what he says in an op-ed. And he says the Middle East crisis sparked by Hamas's brutal slaughter of more than 1,400 innocent Israeli civilians on October 7th, 2023. Okay, the Israeli government doesn't even claim. I think the official number is 1,148, something like that, 1,100, around 1,150 killed. No one's like, who's claiming that all the bases that Hamas, I think it's 8 different bases that Hamas overran, those are all just innocent civilians at the bases? I mean, it's unbelievable that 13 months later, the Globe Mail would put this in the paper. Stunning stuff, stunning stuff. Just like open lies, open factual inaccuracies. And yeah, there's another thing about this. Yeah, I'll leave that. And then just finally, the JNF case, the court refused to overturn the CRA's revocation. There's another case down the road that JNF's still pursuing, and there's some of the reporting ultimately ends up being incorrect. So the JNF, man, they are liars. They lie to their own people. They lie to this, but JNF, the CRA has not forced them, as we put in this press release, because it was the JNF Instagram was saying this, and Canadian Jewish News was reporting this, that they have to get rid of all their money by November 13th. The date's actually later on. We don't know exactly when that date is. We know it's within a year that they have to dispose of all their assets. It's not actually in 2 days from now, but they do have to dispose of their assets. And but anyways, that's a victory there that's definitely a positive, the court ruling. And I guess just finish off with There's a demos, the F-35 demos, a number of cities across the country on Saturday that people should check out. And I guess I just want to just also mention, if people haven't seen it, the interaction I have with the Israeli consul here in Montreal is quite a fascinating one. This guy is totally unhinged, and I he calls me a he says I'm engaged in genocide, fascism, and killing. These are quotes here: killing people on a daily basis after I asked him about committing genocide, whether Israel's committing genocide. And then he goes on about how I'm embarrassed of my own people, and then Israel's trying to liberate the Palestinians. Anyways, it's a totally fascinating interaction. Honestly, it speaks to the fact that Israeli society is not okay. I think I'll leave it at that and go ahead, Nadia, and I will try to make Laura a co-host. You're unmuted, Alia.
Thank you, Yves. I just wanted to mention that they not only did not, they were one-sided about Amsterdam, but they actually distorted the facts. I mean, you could see on your screen that it was the Israelis who were attacking anybody who was holding a Palestinian flag, and they were haphazardly attacking everybody. And then the newspapers report the opposite. It's unbelievable. They lie, contrary to the facts. The other thing I wanted to say is that the election of Trump is very bad news because he's going to be used as a puppet for the billionaires who financed his campaign, beginning with Elon Musk. And what they're going to do is draw back 200 years of progressive legislation. They want to roll back the first of all on the environment, all the environment laws. They want to push the fossil fuel industry. They want to roll back the welfare state. I mean, it's really, really bad news. I don't know whether to cry or weep or what, but I was reading Thomas Piketty, who says that we should look at the gains we have made in 200 years, and I'm afraid that Trump will roll back any gains that we had made in 200 years ago. I don't know what you think of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that everything on the environmental front, Trump's going to be, bad, bad, bad. That's been clear to me. I mean, it was very bad last mandate, and I don't follow it closely at all, but there've been all these stories going back months and months and months of Trump just basically saying like to the different fossil fuel and other corporate interests, whatever you want in terms of the on the ecological front, getting rid of this, doing this, that just, exchange. If you want this, you got 50 million bucks my campaign, boom, it's totally crass, kind of almost that kind of crass. So yeah, that I think on ecological issues, I think for it's unequivocally a bad thing. Um, on From the standpoint of further tax cuts to billionaires and the wealthy in the states, it's Biden is slightly better or substantially better than Trump. There's so many things that Trump's bad on. On foreign policy, on Canada's foreign policy, I'm not like sure that it's all just totally, clear cut. And one is all, like what Biden's done on Gaza. I'm not 100% convinced that Trump would have given $27 billion in mostly given, whatever, 80% or something like that, probably, we don't know exactly, I think, to Israel over the past 13 months. As much as pro-Israel as he is, the sort of like that whole like, make others pay their way and all that kind of stuff. And Israel, of course, can't pay its way. I think that there's a chance that, and a rhetoric around not sort of a rhetoric against war. Um, I'm not totally convinced that Trump would have actually given all that. Now he would have tried to make some deal with Saudi Arabia to disappear the Palestinians and all that he clearly did with the Abraham Accords and stuff like that, and recognition of Golan and moving the U.S. embassy and this and that. But I'm not 100% sure he would have done as much to enable to participate in the genocide in Gaza as Biden's done.
So
So,
even, oh, sorry.
yeah,
I
but
just wanted you know there are three people with questions. You
yeah,
mentioned you had to.
yeah, I
Can you
can go.
take the
Yeah,
three? Okay.
yeah, I
So
go.
go ahead, Philip.
Hi, yeah. On Trump and Gaza, maybe I'm being a little Pollyanna, a little too over optimistic, but I think if we appealed to Trump's ego and his desire for revenge against his political enemies, we could, convince him that if he became an advocate for peace on the Gaza issue, he can pin the genocide entirely on the Democratic Party, on Biden, on Harris, on Clinton, on the whole establishment. His enemies in American media who are all propagating the pro-genocide bullshit. He can pin it all on them. And he becomes the man who stops the genocide and hold those accountable for the genocide to account, and he could avoid any political scrutiny by saying he just, Trump judges, send them all to the Hague. I don't know. It's say being optimistic, but the man has an ego and a desire for revenge. If it was put to him that way, might be something he'd be interested in. Plus, I know his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, a Zionist, but he also has a son-in-law whose father is from Lebanon. So, he has family ties to Lebanon through marriage. So, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. My guess is that the person apparently he was appointed to the UN just today or yesterday or is she led the committees on going after the university students on Palestine and stuff like that. So she's like a uber Zionist. Um, but yeah, I don't think he's not gonna buck. I think I think Trump would probably like to claim. I like you frame it like he would like to have, it's not, this isn't me, and put it on Biden and stuff like that. And he may be asking Netanyahu to finish things up before he takes office, right? But then what's the next stage and all of that? I don't know if some sort of agreement with Saudi Arabia to recognize Israel and all that kind of stuff. I don't, I think if Trump wanting to do that, probably he is. Whether Saudi Arabia would do that right now, I don't know. Probably, well, they certainly wouldn't do it right now. But what would need to happen with regards to Gaza and the West Bank for them to maybe go along with that? And then there's the Iran question, and this whole hyping up of Iran trying to assassinate Trump, which is a really ludicrous. The whole thing is a really ludicrous story. Um, but apparently, part of it, according to one report I saw, was that the guy was also commissioned to assassinate Trump if he lost. So why would Iran want to assassinate Trump if he lost the election? Anyways, but so the yeah, I don't know where he's going to go on Israel. I presume it's just going to be more of letting Netanyahu do whatever Netanyahu wants to do, but we'll see.
Okay, go ahead, Hans.
Yes, I would like to make two brief announcements about some very ambitious actions that are taking place tomorrow and on Wednesday in Toronto. Um, if you're shell-shocked about Trump winning, this is the way to break free and show that we're still alive and kicking. The first action is called Shut Down the Defender of Israel Award, i.e. Harper. This is an action called by the Palestinian Youth Movement for 5 p.m. tomorrow at 5040 Young Street, Uptown. It's out of the usual venue of our mass mobilizations. And for that reason, I encourage us all the more to try to participate at 5 p.m., 5040 Young Street. The second action is on Wednesday, 7 p.m., also in Midtown, at a library, I believe at 40 Orchard, Young and Eglinton, featuring Dimitri and Tamara. Lessons we should draw from the Ukraine and the Gaza wars. Both of these events have not been enjoying the great amount of publicity that they deserve. So all the more important for us to try to participate. I'll forego my usual comments, except to say that the one anniversary that we celebrated this weekend, celebrating is the wrong word, but in the case of the 35th anniversary of the fall of the wall, and with it, what should have been the demise of NATO, that was never mentioned in all the Remembrance Day celebrations or Remembrance memorials, conspicuously absent. Anyway, thank you. For the sake of brevity, I'll just mention one more word. The fact that Olaf Scholz was the first of the vassals of Biden to fall in his demise is highly significant and to be saluted.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks for telling us about those events. Go ahead, Jake.
All right, just to say about the demo against Harper, which is the 5040 Young Street, the center is called Center for the Performing Art or something like that. It's a very lucrative building there. I want to ask you, do you think in regard to JNF, now that the ruling came out, would they really fold up everything, sell the furniture in a garage sale and will go away, or they will find another way to rebirth themselves, different name, different this, different that, and the Canadian government will turn a blind eye, and they will continue till we go after them for another 20 years and so on. What do you think?
Well, they're clearly trying that. They've done. I mean, they even tried to withdraw. There's a different mechanism. Forget the wording that's used, but basically, rather than having their status revoked, and that then doesn't. Basically, they have the money being dispersed, but the language is pretty aggressive in terms of the assets of the charities, what they have in terms of having to disperse of the money and stuff like that. I think at this point there still is a legal effort that they are pursuing, another legal effort they're pursuing. I think at this point the JNF is very unlikely, very, very unlikely that it's going to maintain. But yeah, I don't know that it like so long as people are willing to give money to projects in Israel, there's going to be initiatives. Now, the JNF has a name recognition to it. There is a part of what the JNF was about was also a political and shouldn't be, this is about bringing in politicians to these gala dinners and sort of like networking, hobnobbing, and all this. 'Cause there's a whole political side to it that's quite important, and it's probably it's the second most powerful Zionist charity. The most powerful, of course, are the federations. But the JNF, like in terms of its political, like the politicians it brought in and stuff like that, is kind of remarkable of how many, and that's not going to be replicated. I don't see how that's done. Like even if somehow the JNF was able to like win this legal battle, which is seems like very, very, very unlikely. Even if they won that, they would their brand has been seriously harmed. Yeah, but yeah, so long as people are wanting, willing or wanting to give money to projects in Israel, and the Canada Revenue Agency allows for that to happen to subsidize that for all taxpayer subsidies, yeah, the money's gonna funnel somehow, but we're clearly making it more difficult on them. Ultimately, I think there should be legislation brought in that says whether the legislation is direct in terms of Israel focused. I'm fine with that. Of course, this is just legislation that says the Canada Revenue Agency is no longer going to support, no longer going to subsidize charities supporting an apartheid state committing a Holocaust. I don't know, exactly how you word that legislation, but that or broader legislation that basically says the Canada Revenue Agency is not going to support projects principally in countries where where the GDP is equivalent per capita as Canada's. So why should the Canadian government subsidize a symphony in Israel? Like I don't why they do that. Why should it subsidize the hospital in Israel? Right? Like, you can make a case for like poor countries, right? But why in a country that has a GDP per capita equivalent to Canada? So anyways, there'll be all kinds of ways you could do it. Now there's probably 100 organizations right now that if you apply registered charities, that if you applied CRA rules, existing CRA rules, somewhat rigorously, they would lose their charitable status, right? There's probably 100 of these, especially if you got into like books, bookkeeping and stuff like that, because probably most of these charities of any different sort, bookkeeping is probably not that good. And if you really start applying rules, you probably could. But just on the settlements, on foreign militaries, on racist organizations, and on supporting other countries' government agencies or municipalities, all of which is now currently illegal according to CRA rules. Um, there's probably 100 groups, charities doing that right now with Israel. So yeah, I mean, I think that will the JNF? Yeah, I mean, I think the JNF is probably gone, and it's not happening on November 13th. It's not and that's totally fascinating how much the JNF lies, like I said, to its own people and stuff, and what that information, but it's coming pretty soon, and yes, they will sell all their assets, or they'll just take them. The government will take them, and the JNF would prefer to give them to other charities, Zionist charities, than to have them, taken.
Okay, Yves, thanks very much. That's it. Or that's the last question.
Take care,
Thanks.
everyone. Good.
Bye, everyone.